Dobrý den. Welcome for another session of our Monday linguistic seminar. We are very happy that Professor Filip Smolík from the Institute of Psychology from the Academy of Sciences has accepted our invitation to give us a talk and to get us acquainted with some issues from the area of psycholinguistics, I can call it that way. I think this is not the first time, actually, we have you here, not only here, but also as our Hejnice seminar, so that we are really curious to see how grammatical categories are born. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your opening and especially for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here, and my presentation is perhaps a bit different from my previous opportunities, because rather than trying to give you some idea about a topic in the field, this is really a small peek in the current work of our research group. It goes very straight to some of the issues we are trying to address. I see that my title is not very modest, so perhaps I should have said how are grammatical categories born with a question mark, because I cannot answer the question, but what I will try to show you is some ways that we think could help us in addressing this issue. When talking about us, it's really primarily this group of people who are currently working in our group. So all the work that I will be showing is in collaboration with some subset of these people. I also borrowed really a very corporate style pictogram for points where I think we would especially appreciate input from your community and from people who are close to the processing of corporatory banks and generally the body of language as is available for automatic processing. So here is what actually are the sort of driving ideas to some of the research I will be showing. We can probably agree that the knowledge of language requires some knowledge of the meanings. So essentially conceptual understanding of the world and some interface with lexicon. That's not really the topic today. Then the knowledge of some linguistic forms and maybe the rules or regularities that govern the formation of these forms. So such as how to create desks from desk in English and so on. And then knowing the categories. And what are categories? That's, of course, the million-dollar question, but we know that language, the knowledge of language requires different types of relatively abstract entities that at some level people must master to be able to actually implement the knowledge. So, and these categories are of different sorts. So some of them are more syntactic or syntactic semantic. Some of them are really intrinsic properties of individual words. Some of them are productive but still focus on the words. those are things that we need to know language. But how do we get to know them? So that's the question. And my title also talks about predictivity, because it's turning out that the ability to predict the upcoming language, the upcoming parts of sentences, is probably quite instrumental in the process of learning and acquiring language knowledge. So hopefully I'll get there. But I will start with something that seems to be simple, at least when we look at it from the viewpoint of English. The whole notion that language has rules is often illustrated with relatively easy examples, such as the creation of the English plural. And we agree that like describing rules such as creating plurals by adding s, or forming past tense in English by adding some form of the d suffix, is a viable description of a regularity. But we also know that it's not, even for English, it cannot be the whole story, because not all words behave in such a nicely organized manner. Or in languages such as Czech, simple rules are hard to be found, even if the rules are relatively simple. So adding something towards the end to create the genitive singular form, the actual way in which you do it actually depends on the word itself or some categorical membership, and sometimes it gets even more complicated. So one of the questions in psycholinguistics has been to what extent people really use something like rules in dealing with word forms. And it's not just psycholinguistics. Obviously, this has counterparts in more linguistic theories, like John Bybes and others, but it's not my area. So I'm looking at this more from the viewpoint of what people have there in their heads. And we have a long-standing debate or research topic in whether people store inflected forms in their memory as separate lexical units, or whether they form them when they are needed, whether in production or in comprehension, according to some rules of regularities. Or, which probably is the most current approach for many people, if there is some combination of both. But to me, the more interesting question is how any of the rule-based approach would work with something as complicated as Czech morphology, especially in children. So just to show one way in which people were trying to differentiate the storage versus rule mode of knowing inflected forms, this has been based on the frequency of lemmas, all the word forms together, or the specific inflected forms. This is not actually the first or among the first papers. This is a paper that already developed a sort of combined approach, arguing based on the data from Dutch plural recognition, that recognition of plurals is faster in nouns that often occur in plural. So this is the scheme of the response times there, and this dotted line shows response times for plural dominant nouns that have a lot of plurals, plural occurrences. And these are singular dominant nouns. So if a noun is singular dominant and you have to recognize the plural, you are slower. But if the noun is plural dominant, you are not slower at recognizing the singular. So the interpretation was that recognition of plurals is faster in nouns that often occur in plural, but not vice versa. So the interpretation is that the singular is essentially the basic form that is always accessed even when we process the plural. So it would be something like the nest form or the hash key, so to speak, while plural is rule-based unless it occurs very frequently. By the way, Harold Bain today does not even think morphemes exist, so he would not subscribe to this interpretation, I suppose. But I am showing this to demonstrate one way in which people empirically tried to differentiate the memory storage of inflected forms versus rule derived storage. And that's essentially just to set up this other way of addressing the question that was introduced by Michael Ullman and Elizabeth Prado. A lot of the work on this has been done in the realm of English past tense that has a very nice clear-cut distinction between the regular and irregular forms. And Prado and Ullman suggested or found in their data on the processing of English plurals that people are faster at recognizing and evaluating plurals if, not plurals, past tense of verbs, past tense forms of verbs, if these verbs are highly imageable, have highly imageable meanings. I'll explain in a minute. But this was only true for irregular verbs. So for those that have quite opaque relation between the infinitive and the past tense form. For the regular verbs, there was no relation to imageability. So they interpreted this, and Ullman is one of the proponents of really the classic dual root model, memory versus rules. So they took this as an argument that rules are applied to regulars, but memory is applied to irregulars. So imageability is essentially how easily a word gives you a sort of internal sensory image, how easy it is to imagine the referent. It's something that you can't measure in an objective manner. You have to ask people for judgments. But since 1960s, it's been known that it's very strongly related to memory performance for verbs. And it turns out that it is also related to memory performance when the meaning of the word is not the primary target. This graph actually shows a reanalysis of a publicly available data set that I did, not the data set, the analysis. That's from David Balta's lab. And it essentially replicates the fact that imageability effects in the verbs are found only in irregulars. But in addition, it shows that it's only in relatively low frequency irregulars. So it's not quite exactly the same thing as Prado and Ullman found. But my point is that there are various diagnostics for the memory versus rule debate. This shows the results of two master's theses that I supervised over the last 6 years, and we still haven't really made a paper of it, but hopefully it will get closer as Lukáš Jiříčka is working on his dissertation because that's his topic. Here, obviously, Czech does not have a simple regular-irregular distinction. But we were trying to find sort of more or less predictable forms. And also, regardless of whether the forms are more or less predictable, we wanted to test if whole form frequency, frequency of the specific inflected form, and imageability would have effects on producing inflected forms. And the first study was on genitives. So we showed people the nominative form and asked them to produce it as if it were after the preposition bez, without. So that takes the genitive. This other work that's shown here is about eliciting the past participles in verbs. This shows the results on genitives. One thing is that there is hardly any difference between using the nominative, genitive, or all other case form frequency. So the frequency diagnostics that I mentioned and illustrated with the Bayes approach does not really seem to indicate anything. But imageability in Czech children, those are data from fourth graders, was actually a pretty clear predictor of the speed with which they created the inflected form. And also there was an interaction, at least in some models, between two types of genitive formation. One that only included this no change, essentially only included adding the affix, the suffix. The other either included a stem change or the change in this inserted e, špačik, špačka, for example. So this would suggest that in children, imageability again is more engaged in something that is sort of less predictable and therefore maybe relies more on memory. These are results on verbs that are sort of complex to treat, and they compare fourth graders and seventh graders. This is frequency, and these red lines are higher, low imageability verbs. Green ones are high imageability verbs, and it essentially suggests that imageability facilitates the production of the inflected form in high frequency verbs in fourth graders, but not in seventh graders. Which should be consistent with the idea that kids first have to memorize the forms they're learning, and as they go along, they get some sense of the regularities that govern their formation. So, as I said, we are interested in this in Czech because we don't have a clear regular versus irregular form distinction, but we probably would agree that some forms are created in more or less predictable ways. So one question is if we can somehow quantify and predict what will be more or less predictable. And also to what extent this is governed by the knowledge of specific parts of Czech grammar. One of the obvious candidates here is the knowledge of the inflectional classes that differentiates the major patterns of how case number combinations are marked. So that's what we would like to do. Obviously, this is something that's very difficult to do with little children, so we are focusing partly on adults and partly on children in the school age who can tolerate longer procedures that are based on reading, and we're hoping to get further. One aspect of this is looking at whether the complexity of the paradigm for an individual word or for an individual inflectional class will be predictive of the involvement of memory. And inflectional entropy is actually one way in which this can be quantified. This has also been quantified not just as an entropy for a given word and its paradigm, but also for a relative entropy for a given word compared to the paradigm. And there is evidence from Serbian that, and maybe Slovak, that this really plays a role. So if you have, a noun that is of the paradigm hrad, but the distribution of frequencies across nominative, genitive, and so on, or is quite distinct from the typical distribution of form frequencies across other members of the paradigm, it makes this more difficult. What is the ultimate goal? Of course, it's sort of trying to find where, if there is a boundary between using some sort of regularities and using the memory, if the boundary could be described as sharp or rather maybe continuous. There is a proposal by Charles Yang about when it makes sense for the cognitive system to learn the forms item by item, but rather than learning a rule. I'm not going to go into it because I'm by no means oriented in this specific approach, but I just want to mention that there are empirical proposals that can be used. So this is my first potential collaboration advertisement, so to speak, and this is something that we have already been discussing with some of you. Using the Czech national corpus and other tools that are available, it's relatively easy to look at statistics of words and word forms, but it's much harder to look at statistics of these inflectional classes. And it would be really interesting if there was a way to get these statistics, because that could be used to derive empirical predictions on the processing of words that we could then test. So if, we are very much open and welcome any suggestions in this direction. But let me switch to categories. So this is the origin of the title. How are categories born? Now formulated as a question. So in order to learn language, we have to learn that something is masculine or feminine, that something is singular or plural, that something is nominative or accusative. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to communicate meaningfully in sentences. We wouldn't be able to use the combinatorial power of language. And this is something that has to kick in quite early. People, when you tell them that you study grammar in 2-year-olds, they say they have no grammar, they don't go to school. So grammar, well, in this group, I don't have to explain that grammar is not something you get at school. But there's a lot of grammar that we need actually to process what we hear. So 1.5-year-olds hardly ever talk in longer stretches of words where you could look at the structure of the productions, but they still, in order to learn more about language, they have to have some representation of the regularities. So the question, of course, is where these categories and all these different kinds of categories come from, how children identify them, and that includes quite distinct problems, each of which is quite big. Maybe the bigger one is which categories there are, because there is a lot of cross-linguistic variability in which categories are used. Sometimes animacy matters, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes gender matters, sometimes it doesn't, and so on. And the other thing is, of course, how to acquire the markers. So one line that I will be showing now of the work is looking at whether something about the sound of words can serve as a key for at least some of the categories, because from the viewpoint of descriptive grammars, it's quite a reasonable assumption, but it could also be argued that in a complex and unpredictable system like Czech, it could be even counterproductive. So we'll see. So let me talk about our studies of gender and its acquisition. It has been shown around 2 years of age or earlier that children know something about the gender categories of nouns. So the first experiments presented pairs of pictures like this, where one of the pictures, the labels for these pictures either had the same article in French or Dutch, or a different article, and if the potential article for one and the other was different, hearing the article actually helped the children identify the correct picture, so they were faster at looking at the picture. So this with articles, one of the issues is that the articles immediately precede the noun. It's very hard to insert something in between, so it was not quite clear if it was just helpful for finding the noun in the mental lexicon or if it actually created some expectation. So now one of the attempts to correct for this was our study, where we actually used sentences such as taková veliká kniha or taková veliká míč, so with adjectival type agreement between the noun and the introducing passage, with either matched or mismatched incorrect agreement. And we actually did this on really young children, like 21 to 24-month-olds. So we didn't have an effect for everyone, but we had effect for the better half of children according to another measure of language comprehension. And there we found that even after hearing this initial they would start looking towards the feminine member of this. So after hearing they would start looking to the book. You know, in this graph, you see the effect starts somewhere here, but the 0 time is actually the onset of the noun book in this case. So it's a nice evidence. some of the evidence about the predictive processing also comes from the studies by Russian She's team on French on nonsense words. But one problem with existing words is that it could always be a relation of a specific noun and a specific marker. So one question or one thing we may want to do is to see whether children can use gender in a sort of combinatorial manner. But it's, of course, hard to do in nouns because nouns have one gender, at least in Czech. In Italian, actually, you have a lot of these diets or counterparts where the same noun has a feminine and masculine form, ragazzo, ragazza, and so on. And there's a study that actually tested 12, 18, and 24-month-olds and contrasted these feminine and masculine forms and also singular and plural forms. So children saw something like this and then heard guarda la ragazza or il ragazzo. And they, even 1-year-olds could actually make the difference. Obviously, this is not something that you could do in Czech. You could do something like učitel, učitelka, but first of all, those are not the nouns that the kids who are between 1 and 2 would know. And even if they knew, it's not really the derivation of the feminine forms typically from the masculine forms is quite variable. So it's not quite inflection. But what we tried to do was again taking it to the adjectives. So we ran a study this summer taking the idea of showing two faces and then playing something like, yeah, hele, koukej, jak je chytrý, je fakt chytrý. We actually used 4 distinct adjectives and presented it in various ways. So each child heard 16 items. And notice that the adjective was presented 2 times. There was no noun. So the only way they could learn about the gender was from the adjectival ending. After the first adjective, there was no effect, but after the second adjective, the children actually looked more towards the corresponding face. So this is drawn so that is a proportion of looks towards the male face. So when the masculine form is what they hear, the curve should be higher and it should be lower for feminine forms, and that's pretty much what happens some 1 to 3 seconds after hearing the second adjective. So, it's just one experiment with kids, and one question is what children actually use. And ultimately, they have to learn the form or the gender of nouns. So that's our next step, something that we would like to do next. But before we started doing with the children, we actually wanted to test this with adults. So I will be showing adult data for which the child data collection or the data collection from children is ongoing. And this is a non-word study that essentially presented people with nonsense words created in particular ways and tried to test whether probably quite intuitive predictions we could have are in line with what people do. So probably what would people consider the most typical feminine ending would be a. We know, of course, there's a lot of forms that can end with a and are not feminine, but still we assume that there is a strong tendency towards this. The hard consonant endings, especially, might be characteristic for masculines. So we are interested in this because it's one way in which children could be actually breaking into the system. So taking some of these regularities that are not perfect and using them for the start and then correct for the areas of grammar where it doesn't work. There is a precedent for this approach in the study of Slavic diminutives. Slavic languages are quite have a strong tendency to overuse diminutives with children, which sometimes is viewed as a sort of cultural weird thing. But Vera Kemp and others, but especially Vera, have suggested and documented with data that it may be a very functional mechanism of simplifying the morphology. We have 4 feminine classes of nouns, but all feminine diminutives are one class. So instead of like 4 or more classes of nouns, you are reducing this to 3. We are just trying to do this, but back to the adult experiment. So we use the faces, and again, using the faces is probably not the best thing with adults, and I'll talk about this, but it's because we want to compare the adult data with child data, and with children we really have to use something that's instructive. So we created 20 non-words, sort of pseudo-roots, and combined each with 5 different final segments. Some of them, they are not endings because some of them, like a, ek, ka, could be considered endings, but some of them are just the end consonants, hard or soft. Well, this is the opposite. The 20 non-words and those 5 final consonants gives us 100 items that we presented to 128 participants. So this is just example of one set. And we introduce this as a game where we have some words from the future and we want to guess something about their meaning. We know that they are words for things people do, such as teacher or mechanic. But we would like to guess that maybe if it's something that would be more likely to be a woman or a man. So it's really quite simple. And the results are quite in line with the expectations. So this is the probability of choosing the masculine picture, which is rather low for A and K and rather high for all the others, but visibly lower for soft consonantal endings compared to hard consonantal endings or ek. If you look at this actually by the individual final consonants, it becomes a bit more complicated. So there is a quite specific difference between h and r being more masculine and being more feminine. The differences are pretty much replicated by response times, even though this is not really meant to be a response time task, but they also quite closely follow the whether token or type frequencies of nouns with nominatives of that sort, except the feminines that end with ost must be taken out. Otherwise, this looks quite different. Again, when this is done by the individual end segments, it tells a little bit more complex story, but I just wanted to demonstrate. So one question is whether these quite clear results, the strong probability of choosing one over the other, mean that people are forming some category. Well, we don't know, but some theories suggest that people should probably form categories first and later maybe question them. But our pattern is exactly the opposite. So these numbers are actually the segments of the experiment, first, second, and so on. And you see that everywhere people are getting more categorical along the experiment. So maybe it's just, a tendency to simplify the task. Obviously, as I said, this is a deliberative task that has various social aspects. People can have different approaches to it. So it's nice to ask whether these novel nouns trigger gender agreement in sentences that is more or less purely formal. That's hard to do with kids, but we can do it with adults. So we tried these same words in 2 self-paced reading studies so far, presenting people with sentences such as zaznamenali jsme, že dyr je slepený or dyr je slepená. So this is something that is typically interpreted as masculine, as feminine, and it should agree with this or that. In the second experiment, we used the ek versus ka final segment. So if you're not familiar with self-paced reading, the people see this, and then they press a button, and then see this, and so on. So you can get a measure on each word. So when we looked in the first experiment at reading the adjectives, there was no interesting difference. But when we looked at the 2 words after the adjective, we got a clear effect. So when people heard zaznamenali jsme, že dyra je modrá, people were faster than zaznamenali jsme, že dyra je modrý. And zaznamenali jsme, že dyr je modrá, was slower than zaznamenali jsme, že dyr je modrý. In the second experiment, we got pretty similar results, except, well, not quite similar, because the ka ending is surprisingly not as feminine as we would guess. So, something like zaznamenali jsme, že dyrka je slepený was not more surprising that dyrka je slepená. So one assumption or one possibility is that the formation of the type, nešika, maybe even trouba and so on, is a strong factor, but it could be something else. So this is really an area where it would be interesting to look at various aspects of corpus data to see what could be happening here. This type of studies has actually been done in other languages for not that much for gender, but for plural formation, for example. Some of them using the naive discrimination learning models to look for n-grams in the words that are associated with gender. We are just looking at whether there could be some other computational or corpus tools that could help us derive hypotheses about what in the word shapes could be the driving source of information for probabilistic hypotheses about their formation. I noticed that in the set of tools that are available here, there is a tool for inflecting non-words. So maybe inside of the tool there is something that is based on some sorts of these hypotheses. So if any of you is familiar with this, I think it would be a great topic to talk. Also, we have not huge, but by the standards of child language, quite big child corpus, including child-directed speech corpus. So it would be interesting to see whether the adult statistics differs from the child statistics somehow. We have a lot of plans with this, but now we want to look at non-words in very young children, which we, of course, cannot do with 100 items. Right now, we are collecting data on the 100 items, not in each individual child, but piece by piece in preschools. So I have another set that I don't want to keep you too long, and rather give some time for discussion, but still, I will show you at least the beginning of what I wanted to say about predictivity. So, because it's relevant to the line of work that we have on case interpretation. Maybe you heard Anachroma presenting some of it. What is predictive sentence processing? Since 1970s, it's been shown that people don't wait until the end of some segments to interpret sentences. They, to some extent at least, try to make sense of the upcoming words as they come. In the 1990s, the method of eye tracking has been used to show this. So this is from the famous study by Jerry Altman and Yuki Kamide. They presented pictures like this, and people heard something like the boy will eat the cake or the boy will move the cake. When they heard the boy will eat, people started looking at the cake even before hearing the cake, because it's the only edible thing. It was not like that when they heard the people will move. Nivedi Tamani, among others, has shown this in children later on. Actually, the gender experiments that I talked about also show some level of predictivity. We also have another set of studies that look at this in a number, in grammatical number. So podívej, tady skáčou na obrázku koně. The children start looking towards the horses even before they hear koně. Why this matters is partly because it's a good way of testing the knowledge of grammar in children. But that's a sort of practical thing. Theoretically, it's interesting because it may help with something that has been the conundrum in child language research for a long time, and that's the retreat from incorrect generalizations. Children, there are big arguments on whether adults correct children when they make errors, implicitly or explicitly, but pretty much everyone agree that the learning mechanism must be so robust that it does not depend on whether adults correct children. And so the question is, if you don't have positive examples, how comes that you conclude that something doesn't exist? So especially in English, children often have a period when they say things like gold or sleeped and so on. But they stop. So how comes they stop? One proposal is that the predictive processing can be the key. So if you listen to a sentence and predict that it will end up with gold, and you hear went, it can be a sort of implicit corrective feedback without the need of an explicit teacher. There are actually theoretical arguments for this. I'm not going to go through this, but I want to show that we definitely have some evidence that even the knowledge of case marking in Czech children shows some predictive effects. So we have been interested for a long time in the interplay of the knowledge of case form and word order in Czech kids. In the international literature on this, there's long been the sort of assumption that kids everywhere in the world sort of consider the first nouns as agents. Then it turned out that there are quite big cross-language differences, but it has been very rare that experiments were done in a way that was directly comparable. So it's a big question. This just shows results from two studies. One is interesting because it really is predictive. So we presented children with these pictures with three characters or things. And the descriptions always started with the middle character, which was either in nominative or in accusative. So pes tlačí kočárek or psa tlačí kočka. Here is the proportion of looks towards the side character or thing that corresponds to interpreting this as agent. So when children hear pes, they should start looking to the pram because that's where they should expect the sentence will finish. When they hear psa, they should start looking to the cat because that's the only reasonable ending of the sentence, given the picture. And that's pretty much what they are doing. And again, time here is actually the onset of the word that labels the character or the thing at the end of the sentence. So the effects kick in long before this is known. This other study did not look as much as the sentence processing, but it makes it possible to look at this as well. But what is really interesting is that Anachroma designed the study so that it can use the same picture and the same meanings of sentences in Czech and German. And it also has the same pattern of syncretism between nominative and accusative in Czech and German. So the children saw pairs of pictures like this, and they heard descriptions that were either the chicken is feeding the frog or the frog is feeding the chicken. And it could start with the nominative or accusative if the initial noun was frog, or it started with the case ambiguous noun. Not going to go in too much detail here, but essentially what is the most interesting outcome is that German children are much slower, or maybe within the ages that we looked at. So let's say 3 to 5 years, they don't get to the point where they reliably use case marking for interpreting the sentences with the inverted word order. And I'm mentioning this because one possible explanation for this would be the predictive processing. There is one suggestion that when the category membership is presented first and only later the word whose category needs to be learned, the learning will be really weak. We're just running repetitions of this with novel words and in other contrasts, but this is obviously also a thing where it would be really helpful to have an idea about what happens in the corpora. We actually did a lot of manual and semi-manual work on analyzing our child-directed speech corpora on this. Jolana Trechlova did her master's thesis on that, but it's turning out to be much more complex than some people who wrote about this in children's language imagine, especially because there's a lot of differences between whether the words that are used for nominatives for subject and object are nouns or pronouns. So I think there's a lot of other things where I could go on, but obviously the time is limited. So I would like again to thank you for your attention and our lab members for all that work. And I hope you still have some energy for some questions.
Well, thank you very much for your talk. I think it will take some time before we can swallow all the details of your observations, because it seemed to me that some of those were kind of language dependent, some of those were, I don't know, dependent on the age of the children, on the languages, German and Czech. I think the difference there was quite clear. So thank you very much. And now I open the floor for discussion.
I have two comments, not really questions. One of them is, unfortunately, Irka Hanna is not here. It's a story, so it's not probably scientifically relevant much, but he was in the United States when his two sons were born, and he spoke only English with them, and his wife spoke Czech with them, and they called their grandmother often. And interestingly, one of them learned or deduced the LA past tense Czech verb ending to mean the first person, because he only heard it from female speakers, and it was very hard to reteach him how exactly the Czech verbs work in reality, because it was something he never heard, because the only male speaker he knew was his father, who used English. So this was one thing. And the second one, regarding the category, or the, I don't know what English word use for vzory, templates maybe. We have, there are probably other people who know more about it, the creators of the Morphlex system. We have much more of them than what's usually taught at schools, and sometimes this was just there are lots of exceptions because it was easier to program it that way. So it would be, I think, still quite challenging to settle on something that would be beneficial to you. Definitely, we cannot just take the templates we have and give them to you, because there were 300 of them or something, and there are lots of like words that are outside of any categories, even though they can be grouped together, but it was not worth it because there are just few of them. So this is like a bad news maybe, because it's not as easy as it seems.
No, I think, I informally heard about this like system that has a lot of actual sub-patterns or specific patterns, but that's, I think, I would love to discuss in more detail with whoever is interested, because I think the work by itself, like having so many patterns and maybe some information about how common they are, could be a guide for like forming hypotheses about exactly about the memory versus rule debate, or obviously like paradigms that would have really specific patterns with very few members would probably be more likely to show memory effects. Of course, when you try to run things in experiments, you have to watch for many other effects, so you may not end up using all things that you have. But that's, if any of you is interested in this, we would love to talk more about that. And we're sure that it's not, a straightforward thing. But at the same time, the kids must do some sort of statistics over the input. There are wild disagreements in the field about what is the proper way to characterize it, but after all, this needs to be done some way. So the information is something they have to pick up from somewhere. So we are just trying to see if we can find it in their behavior.
I will add another story with L and La. It's a story of my grandson who lives with his father and sister and mother, and they all talk to him in Czech. And still he used, until last week, he used La about himself. I don't know if he talked about other males, but about himself. Já jsem byla. No, always. We corrected him, but he had to find it himself.
Well, these are things that... Sorry.
And about this, I confirmed this with more flex. It would be really hard because there are many, many exceptions.
Yeah, but the point is that the exceptions are the interesting thing. So the statistics of exceptions is really probably the indicator that something should be stored in the memory. So but it's a technical issue to discuss what could be used for making predictions about people. But speaking of the kids overusing some inappropriate forms, especially the feminine participles in boys, and sometimes the opposite. It's quite a common observation, but we don't really know how regular, how frequent it is, and especially what would be interesting to see is for how long time these things happen, because I'm pretty sure they are not uncommon, they are not all that surprising, but my hunch is that there is a huge individual variability, especially in the very young children, like before 3 years of age. You see a lot of variability in how they approach the task of learning a language. Some of them, like, form sentences really early, even though they have a hard time like fully forming them or like finishing them properly. Others like focus on nicely formed short phrases that are more labels than predications. And I think there's a couple of studies that took this as a topic. It's interesting because ultimately they arrive at some sort of language knowledge that is similar enough across individuals that it makes it possible to communicate. So the interesting thing would really be to see how much variability and how much systematicity and in which phenomena there is. This is a little bit similar to the I-U exchanges that are also sometimes observed, using ja for the other person and te for myself, which Anna Kroma is actually defending her dissertation on that next week. This has been a big topic in various studies, or not a big topic, but a lot of times people drew big conclusions from this. But it is not actually all that frequent. If you look at the transcriptions, and I'm sure that it's more frequent than the transcriptions show, because it's probably limited to certain times in the children, and it's hard to hit the time when it happens. But it's definitely maybe not as big as the conclusions that were sometimes drawn. So it has been, for example, considered a marker for autism spectrum disorder risk, but it looks like it's as common in the children at risk for these disorders as in typical children.
I was talking about 2.5 years old, so really very, very little. And I just wanted to tell that it probably does not depend on what he heard. It can be various reasons for that speaking.
Yeah, the typical explanation is that, of course, they typically have more input from their mother, so that maybe they may just consider the love form as the basic form of the participle. My daughter has used the masculine form for a very short time. I wouldn't notice, but my wife did. And she had an older brother. So our interpretation was that she was just, doing it the way he did. But it's hard to know what, like from these anecdotal observations.
Yeah. Thank you for the lecture. I have a question about a thing that you briefly mentioned, the self-paced reading experiment, where you were showing that there was this spillover effect, that you saw the difference only like 2 words later. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to ask if you did some more work about this, if there is some sort of generalization that one can do, that the effect is usually exactly 2 words after, or if you have...
Not exactly 2 words after, but it's quite common that you get the what's called the spillover effect. So you get bigger effects not at the point of the violation or unexpected phenomenon, but after it. So like Jan Chromý did a lot of work on the Czech garden path sentences, and so sentences that are disambiguated to the unexpected reading, and at the disambiguating point, you usually get some effects, but you often get stronger effects even after it. Yeah, the 2 words are just because we don't have too much material after it. So if we don't want the region to include the last word, which has its own set of issues, we have to use just the 2 words.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for a very inspiring talk. I have 2 comments, or multiple things actually. So I can maybe, since I'm here, say them one by one. First of all, the Jollich experiment, who is Jollich? I very much preferred the other variant, which was focused on the grammaticality check than the pictures, because with pictures, originally I thought that you were checking the name of the person, so kind of a nickname. And with nicknames, they very often cross genders, as far as I can tell. And then you explained that it was not the gender, it was not a nickname, but it was like an occupation.
That's why we were trying to sort of not dictate, but give the people the reading that it was not really the individual label. But yeah, it's open. It's open, obviously, to this. They could have created a strategy like this later on.
Yeah.
So the pictures are really there because we want to do it with kids, and it's just the simplest.
That I wanted to kind of warn that maybe these days with the kids today, there is more gender equality spread in the population, and it would be like more inappropriate for a modern kid to assume that whatever a teacher is a female. So it depends on the.
Yeah, but these are these are supposed to be relatively. Well, they don't have semantics, obviously, so we are hoping this doesn't. We are hoping that the social aspect of gender does not enter into it too much. But obviously, that is the problem with this approach, that once you do it with faces, you are making it a social thing. So we have experiments where we want to test this with objects with very young children, but those make it hard to map a broad group or a bigger group of words. That's there you really have to focus. So we are using this essentially as a descriptive approach to get some background data to generate good candidates for testing it in a more formal and less social manner.
Yeah, thanks. So then another thing is the diminutives, that all feminine diminutives have actually fall belong into the same declination class. That's a great observation. I think it was your observation or someone else.
Yeah, it's Vera Kemp. So she's in Scotland, but she's Russian-German originally. So
more such like simplification cases, so that maybe the categories are learned because people speak to children in some simplified way without actually knowing that it is a simplification. So the diminutives are not used as a form of simplification, but they have this feature as well. So can we search for more such cases?
I'm not aware of. It's a very good question, but probably nothing is obvious enough that it will strike us. But that's exactly the kind of phenomena we would be interested in, because maybe, even without diminutives, people prefer using some classes of nouns with the kids. That could be one possibility, or they could choose the forms they use, rather than saying something in nominative, they would find a way to say it in a case form that is more distinctive for some reasons. I can imagine a lot of things, and obviously one question then would be, how comes that people do such sophisticated things? But we have good reasons to think that people are very sort of sensitive to the mutual interaction, the information they are giving in mutual interaction. So it may be a way to make them feel that they are being clear. That's also one explanation for what's called the child-directed speech. So we tend to talk to children in a different way. It's quite culturally specific. Anglo-Saxon countries today, they really tend to exaggerate this. It's much less conspicuous elsewhere. But to various extents, it's universal. One explanation for this is that you are just essentially mimicking the child. And that is, we know that we mimic our partners, even as adults, in many ways. That's Simon Garrett from Glasgow and Martin Pickering from Edinburgh. They proposed the theory of interactive alignment, that essentially interlocutors tend to converge on the means they are using, both on various levels of language, including syntax.
Thanks. And one last question, if I may. That's about the imaginability. So is it maybe related to some assumed frequency of that concept or lemma as it would appear in the child like corpus of what child was exposed to?
Well, all the effects, if you study effects of imaginability, you of course always control for frequency, because overall more imaginable words tend to be more frequent, although it's not a perfect relation. But for example, I did an analysis of the age of acquisition of approximately 500 words that are included in a questionnaire of children's vocabulary that we have from Czech, and controlling frequency was a less strong predictor than imaginability of the age of acquisition of the word. So, and this is imaginability is just one of the many what's called subjective norms. Today, people argue that it's not really the primary variable, that the primary variable for this is actually the relation to senses. So Dermot Linnet and his lab started doing ratings of how visual, how tactile, how olfactory, how motor related the meaning of a word is. And these ratings are especially strong as markers of how easy it is to access the meaning of the word, but it turns out that sometimes they are even predictors of some relatively formal operations. But so that's a debate and line of research in more semantically oriented study of lexicon. But it looks like these things influence even the relatively formal things about how we retrieve words and so on.
Yeah. So the norm could be actually based on the number of modalities through which you know that concept, and then maybe you could contrast kids where there is a cat in the family, so they have also a tactile experience with them.
It's hard to quantify experience in this way, but in principle, yes. The sensory norms are not typically based on the number of modalities, but just on how strongly people report they associate the word with a modality. But probably like multimodal representation would be
more salient,
always like stronger and leads to faster processing and so on. So
thank you. Thanks very much.